Okay, now for the demo. So I'm going to do this one a little bit more extensive than the last one. Just for the fun of it, I decided I would refresh our memory on how to create an application um, that uses separate migrations for the sort of project context and the identity context. So I will leave the authentication set to our standard identity individual user accounts. I'll just do basic MVC for now and click OK. All right, so here's my standard template. Maybe I'll come to the model classes first. I'll make a class here for my file store object as we discussed in the PowerPoint we just went through together. So I can call it file store. And I'm going to just do a bit of copy and paste here to get the content of the class in place. So it's pretty much exactly as the PowerPoint. The only thing I did is I added one more, a file description. I thought it might be useful sometimes to be able to type a sentence or two. 100 characters, I figured it should be enough because we don't want to be too verbose. And that would give me a chance to say something a little bit about the file, like minutes of the last meeting or minutes of board meeting from June 27th or, something like that. Obviously got some red underlining going on, but we know how to fix that. It's just we're missing a using. So click in front of any one of these ones, go control period. It's my keyboard shortcut to get up the little helper here using system component model data annotations. And away we go. And that gets rid of all those uh, underlines. Okay, so now I have my primary key, my ID. There's my byte array for the file content. And I'm making that required because I don't really want to make a file that doesn't have any content. The MIME type, the file name, and I did add a file description. Okay, now while I'm here though, I might as well, I could create it in a separate location, but just to keep it simple, I'm going to, right along in the same class file here, create my view model. And you notice that it is identical in every way. I could have just copied and pasted that one, I guess. But anyway, the only thing I've left out is this guy right here, right? The file content. That is missing from my view model. Everything else I have pretty much the same. Okay, so I'll just save that for now. Now, obviously I need a context in order to do my code first migrations and all that. Uh, Following the usual approach that we did based on that one online tutorial we started with, I'll add a folder, calling it just a regular everyday folder called DAL for Data Access Layer. Can't think of a better spot at this point to stick this kind of thing. So in here, I'll add my context. So I'll add a class. I'm just going to call it file upload entities. Can't think of a better name. And there we go. So inside here, I'm going to do a couple things. This will, first of all, I want to inherit from DB context. And of course, it won't really know what that is. So I have to do control period, add system data entity. Okay, so now I'm set and ready to do a DB context. And let me just make this bigger. So what I'm going to do is I'll make a DB set of file store objects, file stores, I guess. Now, at the moment, it doesn't quite know what that is, but that's only because I put it in a separate folder, right? So I have to add a using for my new file upload models folder. And as I usually like to do, I like to override on model creating, where I actually come in here and I don't like to pluralize table names, right? And as well, I prefer as a default not to enable cascade delete. I'd rather protect parent records if they're related child records in another table, so I can't just delete them. So that's just my preferences of how I like to have things work. And since I'm going to, in this case, have separate migrations, each for um, the identity system, security, users, logins, roles, and all that, and my actual project tables, I can have my separate conventions in each, and that'll be fine. Okay, so I'll just save that. We're on our way. Now, good idea to make a connection string, so I'm just going to grab this, and then let's come to our web config file. So essentially, I have this connection string supplied that's already set up for my default connection. We know from experience now that that is what is used by the identity system, right? Our security system. And the only thing I did is I did come in here and update it to use my SQL Server LocalDB 2014 version. All right. So what I'm going to do though is I'm going to actually copy that string and just modify it slightly here. So I've given it a different name. This name we know has to match the name of my context object, right, for to find it. Unless I override that in code, I can specify it elsewhere, but that's the easy approach is just stick with that naming convention. And obviously I have to give a name. So I decided to call it my file upload as an MDF file. Initial catalog has to match that. By the way, remember I could, if I wanted to, change the names here of this default name that the system gave for my identity database. Just a timestamp there and so on and so forth. Kind of ugly, I could change that, but I'm not going to. Okay, I'll save, and there we go. So I'm almost ready. I've got my two DB contexts. Remember, this one's here. The other one, ooh, let's remind ourselves, is right here in identity models. All right, here's my application DB context that's already set up and inherits from identity DB context, which is just another DB context that already has DB sets and everything set up for users and roles and all the security aspect, right? And then we see here how it actually references the name of the connection string, default connection, and away we go. So I'm not going to bother changing that. I'm just going to leave that alone. We'll just implement that. I'm not going to add any other fields to the identity user, not in this demo anyway. Okay, just reminding us why we do have two separate DB context objects. So I'm ready to come down under Tools to NuGet Package Manager. Let's get the console up here. So what I want to do is I want to enable, right, migrations, but I'm going to do it separately for the two uh, contexts that I have. Okay, so this is the code I'm going to execute here. I can enable migration specifically by saying which context, right? Context type name, application DB context. So this is the one that was already there by default for my identity system. But this is the nice thing, I can specify a migrations directory. Under my DAL folder, I'll create one for identity migrations. When I press enter, then that should do a lot of work for me, creating this subfolder. All the identity information for the migration goes in there. Gets ready to make sure that the database path is clear and so on. Code first migrations enabled for that one. All right, good stuff. Okay, so here's my next command. So I'll enable migrations as well on my file upload entities, right? I'll set the migrations directory. Also under the DAL folder, I just decided to call it file up migrations. And there we go. Now I have both sets of migrations up and running and ready to go. And if I look inside, I will see here, there's my configuration file. I have my override for seeding data for, in this case, the security system. And same thing here for my actual uh, project files, right? My file up migrations. Now to actually add some migrations, the first one here is for my identity system. So basically I say add migration, configuration type name, and unfortunately I have to fully qualify project, folder, everything right down to, which I could take out of the namespace, right? The full namespace dot configuration, and I'll call it my identity initial create, whatever you want to call that, right? And that should do some work, scaffolding the initial create for my identity system. And there we go. So we see here that it did create all the code for generating all the tables with the standard conventions in place. Notice that we're using cascade delete because that's how the identity likes to work. Very good. Okay, now let's do the same thing basically for my my actual project uh, model migration. So it's the same thing, add migration, configuration type name, and the fully qualified namespace down to configuration. This time, of course, it's used in the file up migrations folder. And so I just called it file up initial. And we'll create that, okay, which is a pretty simple, straightforward. We're just creating our file store. But I'd like you to note, right, that the file content C binary, right? So it uses the binary type here, but that will, in the end, result in the table in a in var binary max. Okay, sorry, that's my point. All right, so I'm ready to actually get some real work done. I just want to seed some data first. So I'm not going to worry about seeding data in my actual file up migrations, right? I really just have the one DB set. I'm not going to try and preload any files into it. But for the authentication system, I usually like to actually get at least one administrator account and some user accounts set up. So I'll come in here. I've replaced already the content of the override for seed with my usual approach to this code. Now I have to add some usings, right? So this is something we did last term as well. Just to quickly refresh your memory, add a couple usings there. And oh, I don't need a favorite ice cream. And the application user, we need to know where the models folder is. And that is pretty well it. Just get rid of that favorite ice cream again. Okay. So just to review quickly what this code does is we just create the administrator role, right, using the actual role manager. And then I loop through, make a few generic users, right? Just user 1234 at outlook.com, all with password. And then my admin user I add to the admin role, and away we go. So nothing too special or different about that. Again, we've done that before. All this code will be up online for you to download. So we're almost ready to actually get into the actual project itself. This is all laying the groundwork for our uh, separate migrations, and I just wanted to review that with you as well. So now I should be ready to actually update the database. So this one is for, again, this is the same code, just calling for the identity system to be updated. So I'll actually update the database there, running the seed method. Good. All right. And then all I really have to do is give the same command for the other database. So I'll be update database, the configuration type name, and then the fully qualified configuration file for my file upload migrations. And that database is created. There we are. So should have good success here. Let's look at the app data folder. And there's my two databases. The one I'm more interested in right now, let's have a look at my file upload. And I have my table here, my file store table. If we look at the table definition, we will see that magical cloak, that byte array, which allows us to wrap any file's content and store it here, was indeed created as a var binary max. Okay, bada bing, bada boom. And we're ready to actually go on to the next part, which will be actually implementing all the file upload.